Hi everyone. Uh, I am Nic Marks, and we're going to have a webinar today on why teams really matter. Um, so I will share a presentation. Says he. I hope everyone's good today. I'm actually a little bit under the weather. Woken up with a bad cold and sore throat today, so I hope my voice is able to uh, keep going through the webinar. Um, so I want to talk about why teams matter and why team experience is so important for happiness and success. And this is really based on a couple of three chapters of the book that I'm working on at the moment, and why and how teams shape us so much. If you don't know me, I'm TED speaker and statistician, and and I work on happiness and how you measure it particularly. So teams matter. I'm going to talk about why teams matter for your happiness at work and in life. What are great teams? Why team leadership particularly matters, and then how to build a better team experience for yourself, for your team around you. So happiness at work really matters. That might sound obvious, but people talk about a lot of other things mattering for your happiness. So one of them is age. This is a graph of happiness throughout the life course. Well, it's a series of graphs actually merged onto one thing. It's something got a lot of attention and is often called the U-shaped curve of happiness, which basically means that we're least happy in the middle of our lives. So this particular screenshot is taken from a World Economic Forum blog. And that looks a fairly scary graph, like, oh my God, we're all going to have a midlife crisis. It's terrible. You'll notice at the bottom it says source Blanchflower and Oswald 2017. Well, if you go to their actual paper, then this is one of the major graphs from their paper. It is from the European Social Survey. It is looking at cross-sectional data on people's happiness through the life course. And again, you see the U-shape curve there quite distinctly on their graphs. So the first thing to say about this is statistically true. But you need to look at this graph, and the reason I want to do it is I'm going to build up to why work is so important. And I know I'm in a distraction at the moment, but it's also just something about statistics here which annoys me about this graph, which is the first thing is have a look over this side of the graph, and you can see a couple of things here, which is that the scale that they are putting in this paper is from 6.4 to 8.4. So the data that they're looking at, it runs from 0 to 10. So they're just looking at 2 points in that data. So that's the first thing to say, is they really, really expanded this effect. The second is, if you look at the age group, is this left-hand side of the graph and the very high peak is all people under 21. By 22, these are people in the UK, actually it's all across Europe. It's a big data set across Europe, 32 nations, as they say. They did it over several years looking at it. But these are all young people across Europe. I mean, 18 to 22, if you're not reporting more happiness then, when you're in the stage where you're just exploring your own autonomy in life, you're going to college, you're having your first kiss, your first relationships, you're exploring alcohol and other things. If you're not happy, then when are you going to be happy? So you can basically ignore that left-hand side of the graph and notice if you did that, you'd actually see a much less steep curve. But then let me draw my attention to the right-hand side there, and perhaps you'll notice that there are two lines here. And actually the top one says with controls, the bottom one says without controls. And the bottom one is pretty flat, really. Little rise, but pretty flat. The top one is with controls means that they are holding for things like income. And what this is basically saying is that older people are happier than we would expect them to be, considering how poor they are. Because in retirement, people have less money, and as a general rule, and they're happier than we expect. Which is a much less strong result. You'll also notice that, yeah, it's rising slightly, but that is saying also saying that, that people who are older are happier, the bottom blue line, but there's what's called a survivor's bias, and it's literally a survivor's bias here, which is that we know that unhappier people die younger. So therefore, when you've got fewer and fewer people in your data set, which you have when they get to 85, 88, they're more likely to have been happy anyway. So what I'm basically saying is this graph is a bit of a nonsense. It's statistically true, it's a small effect, but it's really not as big as people make. Whereas what I want to get to is, oh, sorry, this is just showing actually how small the effect. This is just looking at life satisfaction in the UK, looking at the percentage of people who've scored 7 or higher, which is considered to be, functional scores, not fantastic scores, but, happy enough. And you basically see that there's very, very little difference. So there's a very small drop in that midlife. What it means is that you absolutely don't have to have a midlife crisis. So, a few people are less happy, but most people aren't. Age doesn't matter that much for your overall happiness. However, there are three arenas of life that really do matter a lot. The first is your health. Unsurprisingly, hard to be happy if you feel awful in your body. Relationships are massively important. The most important factor for your happiness and health, much more than things like body mass index, exercise. Relationships are more important. How health is overall, but not necessarily so much health behaviors. And thirdly, our work. Our work is really, really important for our overall happiness and well-being in life. We know, for example, that when people are made unemployed, they are much less happy than we would expect, about 3 or 4 times less happy than we would expect. So what's going on there? It's because the world of work brings us into the realm of relationships. It brings us into the realm of structure to life, purpose, meaning, belonging, feeling useful. These are all really, really important things for our overall happiness and well-being, and work provides that with us. And to give you an example of how much this is a factor, this is the relative effect size of different factors. So here, hopefully, is health. I've rebased health to be 100, so that doesn't mean anything except that I've made that the baseline for how I'm going to compare all the other factors. So this is effect size. So this is the importance of, and you can see age here is yellow because it's the way they framed it is it's a negative effect, which is that it's age 45 to 55 compared to the rest. Yeah. So so we can see that age is an impact, but it's a much smaller effect. It's sort of 13, 15% the effect of health. Look at other things like education, being whether partnered, whether you're in a marriage or marriage-like relationship, whether you've got children under 16. You can see that all these demographic variables are roughly the same size. So what this means is that marriage, being in a stable relationship is slightly good for your happiness. If they had quality of relationship, that would be different here, but this is just the fact, are you not? Children under 16, slight pressure, so there's a slight negative thing. Education, slight advantage, okay? Now I've left 2 undone, so this is household income. You can see it's about 3 times the effect of age, 2 or 3 times the effect of age, but much, much smaller than health. It is hashed here because this is data from the European Working Conditions Survey, and actually this data is merged in from a different set of surveys because they don't have household income there, but it's roughly correct about there. And I've got one less, which is job quality. I'm going to compare above to below average job quality. So similar comparison to good or bad health, to university or no degree, partner versus single. So basically it's a similar comparison. Very nearly as big as health. And in fact, I could definitely make this bigger than health if I wanted to choose top 25% of jobs against bottom 25. I'm just comparing above to below median. And what this means is that rubbish jobs are really bad for you. Good jobs are really good for you. So yes, being in work is good for you, and it also has an impact on your household income. So there's going to be an effect here. But being in a good job is really, really critical for your overall happiness and well-being in life. And what makes for a good job is going to be the next thing. But really, don't feel that being happy at work is in any way selfish. If you want to bring your best self to work, that means you are happy and healthy at work. This is what someone I collaborate with sometimes called Mike Jones calls being sensibly selfish. You know, as in if you look after your own health and happiness at work, that is good for you. It is good for everybody else around you as well. Sacrificing yourself is never going to be a good idea because you're ultimately going to undermine your own happiness and well-being in life. Now, just think for a moment about how happy are you at work, and think about how happy you have been or unhappy you have been in the past. So this is just giving 3 options. Normally, when I ask in surveys, I give 5, but just, think about, are you happy? Are you okay? Are you unhappy? And I'm going to compare 3 fictional characters, a happy person, an okay person, an unhappy person, and really show about how your happiness is good for the organization as well as good for yourself at work. So we'll start. So this is just the distribution in the UK, which is we find most people report that they're happy at work, just 60% or so at any one time. Depends how you ask the question. If I ask how happy were you last week, it gets more down to just over 50%, 54%. But roughly speaking, most people are happy. Quite a lot are okay. A few are unhappy. So we're going to compare these 3 employees and consider the value they add. So a typical value added by an employee over time is going to follow a graph like this. So time is on the horizontal axis, value added is on the vertical one. And it's going to cost an organization to employ somebody, and that's going to happen before they join. So therefore, it's negative to begin with. And then it's going to take time to get the investment in recruiting somebody, possibly even up to a year before you get payback. Will vary from job to job, and organizations try and shorten that time for certain, but it's going to take a time for that to get returned. Typically, though, happy employees are more productive at every point. They're quicker to get to adding value to an organization because they're absorbing and learning, and unhappy ones are not going to be. So that basically that year is going to be reduced to 9 months if a happy person. It's going to be extended to 15, 16 months for an unhappy person. But every point along those curves, the happy employee is adding more value than the okay one, which is really, really important. And I've just made a relatively modest assumption here, 10% extra productivity. You could argue for 15, 20%, but 10% is a modest way of doing it. The thing is that it doesn't only affect how productive people, it also affects their tenure. Average tenure in the UK and the US is approximately 5 years. That's median tenure. Sorry, not tender, tenure. But it's going to vary again a lot. Hospitality, that's going to be down to 2 years. Public sector, that's over 8, 10 years, up to 8, 10 years. So there's going to be differences between sector, differences between ages. Younger people tend to change jobs more quickly than older people. Partly because they're still looking and exploring, partly they're trying to get on, partly older people have found a job they enjoy, so they stay there, or an organization they join, so they've self-selected in something that works for them. Lots of factors going on in there. But happiness affects tenure. So actually, an okay employee might stay 4 years, whereas adding a certain amount of value, whereas a happy employee might stay 6.5, 7 years and adding much more value over a longer period of time. By my calculations, over twice as much value in that time. Whereas an unhappy employee, unhappiness is a signal to change something. So they are leaving pretty quickly. And their average tenure might only be 1.5 years. You might be barely making any money on employing somebody who isn't a good fit. Happiness is a measure of good fit, really. When we are happy, when we're a good fit in the environment we feel good, carry on. When we feel unhappy, it's because we're a bad fit. We move on. So it's carry on or move on. Okay, you can get stuck in between. So my last webinar was getting stuck in okay, if any of you came to that. And that's a place we can get stuck in life as well as at work, which is that when things are okay, there's not a strong signal to change something, but neither is there a strong signal to give our all. And quite possible to get stuck in okay relationship, possible to get stuck in okay health. It's not quite bad enough, not a big enough health event to do anything. So you muddle along. And remember, health, relationships, and work are the 3 most important arenas, domains of your life. So being happy at work is not selfish. It's not, you don't need to think, I need to sacrifice myself for other people, because actually you will bring your best self to work when you are happy and healthy at work. So happiness at work is important to you. It's valuable to your organization. It is ultimately a win-win situation, a very, very genuine win-win. And this, I would suggest, is actually probably still an underestimate. And the reason is going to be around teams, around contagion, which is that our mood is contagious. That, we pick up other people's moods very, very quickly. If you hang about with someone who's got a good positive vibe, it can't help but uplift you. If you're around someone that's got low energy, they're a bit, like what is it, a Dementor in Harry Potter or a black hole, they suck the energy out of you. Some people call this radiators or drains, giving off positive energy, sucking the life out of you. But basically, we catch moods from other people. By the way, other people catch our moods. If you are a team leader, your mood will affect your team's mood very quickly. So you need to be more aware of how you're feeling. There's also evidence from a great book. I haven't given you the reference, Angela, called Connected by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, I think it is. And their book is called Connect, and they talk about how there's 3 degrees of separation there. So teams really matter at work. They're very, very important, and they're going to shape your experience of work. So when you get a new job, what team you're going to work in is going to be very important for your happiness at work, not something often asked in job interviews. There's a great book that really shows this really well. It's called The Progress Principle by Teresa Ombeli, and it's based on a very large study which is tracking using diaries, basically tracking people's everyday. I think she called it inner work experience. I put in a world there, but they're in a world of work, their mood, their feelings about their work. And I didn't put the number in here, but didn't I? Maybe no, I didn't. So basically, it is about 250 people across 25 teams, I think it is, across 7 or 8 organizations. Now, the very largeness of it is that it's for 6 months, people had to fill out a diary at the end of every day. Can you imagine doing that? Taking 5 minutes at the end of the day and writing a diary, sending it to a researcher. I mean, it's amazing. They got a 75% response rate across the 6 months. They worked very, very hard at this, and they got a whole load of fantastic studies out of it because it is such an incredibly rich data set, incredibly difficult for them to collect the data. They did an amazing job. And what they in actually a little bit hidden away in their appendix was this one finding which I really, really liked, which is that they go from most of the 26 teams, there was a fairly close match between the local work environment created by the team leader and the broader organizational. However, for 6 teams, there was a mismatch. For 3 of these teams, the organization context was better than the local. The other 3, it was the other way around. So basically, they've got 6 teams out of the 26 where there's not a match between them. And they did regression analyses on that. And they investigated whether the local or organizational environment had a consistently more powerful influence on the inner work life when the 2 weren't matched. And the results were very striking. They said only the local environment had a significant effect. Now, I actually wrote to Teresa on Bleak when I'm writing the book because I was saying, well, have you actually published this somewhere else in a peer-reviewed paper or something? I wanted to know, and she said they hadn't because they're a little bit worried that there's only 26 teams, and they felt the results. She said she's convinced by the results, but she didn't feel that it was quite publishable. And they had so many other things they were publishing. Well, in our data, we have thousands of teams that we're tracking all year. And I can't do exactly the same analysis as she's done because she had different measures of organizational and team culture. We don't have that, but we measure weekly happiness and we measure the quarterly drivers, the culture profile, if any of you use our organizations, use our tools. So we have these quarterly drivers of happiness too. And what I can do is create a similar, it's not the same as this, but similar, looking at the relative effect sizes. So this is looking at effect sizes of different things. I'm going to look at the effect size of the organization compared to the team on people's happiness at work. And what I found with that, I ran what's called an ANOVA test, which is an analysis of the variance between it and how much of the variance could I associate with the team dynamics, how much with the organizational dynamics. And basically, the team culture explains 4 times as much variance as the organizational culture. So teams are 4 times as important for your experience of work, the team you join, the team you're in, than the organization that you join. 4 times more. And I'm pretty convinced of that as a result. And in fact, I ran it. I haven't put it here. I ran it for every variable that we collect in the culture profile, and most of them were roughly between 30 and 40%. The outlier was team cooperation, which is a very important variable for productivity and as well as for happiness at work. And that was only twice as strong for the particular team that you're in. So in other words, the organization was more driving that team cooperation, which makes sense. So, over a third of your difference in happiness at work is to do with the team dynamics. It's to do with you're following the rest of the team in a way. That does mean that 60, 2/3 of your happiness at work is to do with your own individual work and to do with you. So there is actually, you can read this exactly the opposite way, is that you matter even more than your team. So, you are involved in your happiness at work. Now, sometimes that is about your individual workload, other things or whatever, but whether you are a good fit for the particular role you're in, whether you are using your strengths in your work, these things matter massively too. And so even if your team isn't ideal, you still have options to improve your own happiness at work. Teams matter, basically. And that, just to say, is a very strong result. I think it's probably the same as Teresa Romboley's result. Because she had fewer teams, she couldn't see the statistical significance here. She could see it here, right? Because this was a bigger effect. So this didn't reach significance for her. I think it would have done, but in a much smaller effect size. So in a way, like age to work, or certainly age to income, this is a similar size thing, impact, or being unemployed to being employed, similar size effect on our happiness at work. So what are great teams? I mean, actually, it's really poorly defined what a great team is. I mean, if you look across the literature, people, or you look across how people talk about them, are sometimes using, a great team as a winning team. They've got a winning mindset, or so they draw sports analogies, or they draw analogies perhaps from science and say they've got a great chemistry or something. But they're relatively ill-defined, I think. And there's lots of books on teams, but this is one called The Wisdom of Teams, and a classic definition of a great team is a small, and it's a classic definition of a great team, which is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. I mean, firstly, it's a really dull explanation. It's really wordy, and it's basically defining it by the processes that they are holding. They're not defining it by the outcomes. They're defining it by the processes. I'll come back to the small number later because that is interesting. So I want to create a much simpler definition, and here's mine. A great team is happy and successful. So defined by its outcomes rather than its processes. So it needs to be successful, because otherwise, you'll be out of business. It needs to be happy, otherwise you're driving people out of the business. So, the success is, is being driven, but if you're doing that at the cost of happiness, you're going to drive people out of the business. These two things are really, really important for sustainable success. Teams need to be happy as well as successful. I mean, I think that's obvious, but actually it becomes quite profound when you start thinking about it, because you can actually, I've got two variables here. Now, happiness and success, I've done lots of webinars on this, are highly correlated, but they're not perfectly correlated. So great teams are going to sit up here. They are happy and high performing. Pardon me. Miserable teams are down here. Nobody wants to be in miserable teams. But we've got two other quadrants, and they are these two up here, slacking teams, I call. So they are happy and low performing. It's what every senior leader worries about, that their teams are gonna slack. Burning out teams, high performing but unhappy. These teams are going to be unstable. They are going to lose people. organizations tend to have more of these. In fact, I can estimate pretty good estimates of how many teams are in each of these. So by measuring performance, by asking people whether their team are successfully meeting their goals, I can actually quantify how many people are in each of these quadrants. So I find about 45, sometimes up to 55% of teams are in this space where they are happy and high performing. About half, let's say. 4 times as many as in the slacking. So yes, they can exist. They are something to watch out for. This is not a happiness issue. This is going to be a defining your goals issue, a holding people to account issue. But there are teams that are slacking. That exists. Far more, 2 to 3 times more are burning out, where they are high performing, but they're not so happy. And then down here, 15% in the miserable. That's no good for anybody. And so, if you look at that, the goal should be to be creating more high performing ones. So moving the slacking and miserable ones up to high performing, moving the burning out ones up there. The more that you have in the quadrant in your organization, the better you're going to be doing. I can look at staff turnover in each quadrant. So miserable has the highest. This is in the next 6 months, about a quarter of them would likely to have left. Next is burning out, about 12%, slacking about 8%, only 4% in the great teams. So even in the slacking teams, they've got higher staff turnover than the great teams. And you can see that, the miserable ones are easily the worst, but the burning out's got 3 times as many. And what you can basically see there is that a relationship looks pretty much like this, which is that happiness as opposed to not happy is about 3 times, 3 times more lower, or unhappy is 3 times higher staff turnover, low performance twice as high. So they're both impacting it, happiness even more so. They have covariance together. Actually, strictly speaking, I should do linear regressions and actually I'll show you one on another factor later. Burnout in each. So I'm claiming that burnout is high down below. Well, actually, it's pretty similar between the burning out and the miserable teams. Pretty similar between the slacking and the great teams. In other words, happy to unhappy is about 3 times effect on that number. There's not really much impact from performance itself. It's much more to do with whether people are happy or not at work that burnout. In fact, I'll go into more detail about that because it's not strictly speaking happiness that's driving it. But burnout is about dealing with stress, obviously, and it's accumulation factor. But actually, this is just going to be a tip on avoiding burnout. But thinking here right now about short-term stress, and some of you might have heard me share this before, but there's a picture of 2 smokers here, and you might think, what on earth are you doing, Nick, talking about smoking? But I think smokers can teach us about how to deal with short-term stress. I probably should say vapors now, but I'm going to stick with smokers. How they, because it's it's obviously bad for them that they smoke, but there's something good going on there. So what do smokers do? Well, one thing they do is they very regularly, once an hour or whatever, stop what they're doing. They get up from their desks, they move around, they take their statutory breaks, they move their bodies. Just gonna have a sip of water. They move their bodies. It's really good to move every hour or so. Also, get up, move, stretch, going to release tension in your body. They go outside. You have to smoke outside in the UK, certainly. And getting out in the daylight is good for you. Getting out in the fresh air, ironically, is good for you too. The next thing they do, and you might start to notice that I've started SMO. You might see where I'm going, and you might be thinking, what am I doing with the K? Not the easiest letter to find something for, but kickstart conversations is where I went for it. So they kickstart conversations, which is that they pick up somebody else. Do you want to go for a cigarette? Do you want to come outside, have a chat? Smokers are really, really good at idle chit chat and probably deeper conversations sometimes there. I know when I was a student, I was not a smoker. I used to be jealous of the smokers that they could start conversations, particularly the guys would somehow start a conversation with a girl over a cigarette. It was an easy way into having a conversation. The next one they do, the E, I think people are really quite unaware of when they're smoking or vaping, but they are exhaling for longer than they inhale. if you think of a smoker smoking, I think of them as looking quite blissed out. Well, they are calming their body with carcinogens. That's not good, but they are calming their body by they are breathing in deeply. They're concentrating on their breath. They're concentrating on their out breath. Typically, their out breath will be longer. That's a sign to the body to relax. The predator is no longer chasing you. You have found the safety of a cave. You're not running anymore. You can breathe out. Got away from that. So therefore, you're breathing out longer than you are. And that's signaling to the body to calm. This is the basis of mindful breathing a lot. And they relax. And that spells smoker. So next time you're feeling stressed, think what a smoker would do, but you don't need to smoke. Okay, you can go and fly paper kites. You can do whatever. Go and do mindful breathing itself. I think I'm just going to pop a little link to a video there. Now, I said I'd return to burnout more formally. So that's short-term stress. Short-term stress builds over time, but burnout is more than just cumulative short-term stress. It's also, by the way, notoriously difficult to predict, even by the person themselves. If you've experienced burnout, it might have hit you a bit blindside. But I can see in our data what's predicting burnout. It's by looking at key risks. So I did this 2 webinars ago, I think now, on key organizational risk, but basically looking at what are the risks of teams underperforming, flight risk, burnout risk, and looking at the variables I have and how much they can predict them. There's 2 routes, all of the ones that we use in the culture profile. I'll come to those in more detail in a minute. Predict team happiness, but which of those are going to predict these key major risks for people? And what I was able to show was that burnout was most highly predicted, not particularly by happiness itself, but by work-life balance and appreciation, i.e. a lack of work-life balance. That was the major factor. That's why it's got a double weight on it. And also a lack of appreciation. What does that mean? What it means that if you want evidence-based ways of reducing burnout, then don't let people's work-life balance get out of control. Don't let yours get out of control, particularly for long periods. If you're running a team and you're in a sprint and there's longer hours, really appreciate the hard work that people do and go out of your way to show appreciation, because that will mitigate some of the risk. And you need to a little bit watch out for those that are very committed, because they tend to not look after themselves. They are into that sacrifice thing. I don't mean that critically. I mean that we just have to watch out for ourselves when we get very gung-ho about our job. We can put ourselves in a more risk because we're so passionate about it. So particularly burnout is stronger for people who kind of love the mission that they're on. If you don't care, you go home. So caring can actually be a risk factor. So great teams are happy and successful. Yeah, and I also want to look at another variable which will build into leadership, which is what is the quality of management in each of these quadrants? Well, unsurprisingly, people feel that they're being managed really well in a great team, and they feel they're being managed really badly in a miserable team. But in the other quadrants, it's pretty much the same. So people in the slacking team actually don't feel very well managed. People in the burning out don't. People in the burning out teams, their well-being is not being looked after. People in the slacking team, they are not haven't got enough focus. Both of those groups are recognizing that the leadership matters for where they are in their jobs. They're not self-selecting into these different groups. I'm putting them in them by their answer to other questions. But you can see there that leadership really, really matters. And actually, this is where I did go to regression, because it's not such a clear-cut relationship from there. And the impact on management actually is twice as strong from high to low performing as it is from happy to unhappy. But it's probably because people see management as around goals more. But they're both important. They're both highly significant. But it was the low performance people. Basically, you can see it from the slacking, can't you? That the slacking teams, feel they aren't managed even though they're happy. The miserable ones, even less so than the burning out team. So, but you can also see the going up, but it's twice as strong from performance as happiness. So leadership really matters at work. And again, what is good leadership? What are the qualities? And Google asked themselves this question in the 2000s. They actually started a project called the Oxygen Project, and their actual intention when they started this research was to show that management didn't matter, and they found exactly the opposite. And it's called Oxygen Project because it felt like the good leaders breathe life into their teams. Yeah. And they found 10 key attributes. So basically what they were looking at was the performance of the team, but also how the team felt about their manager and their jobs. So it was in effect measures of great teams. They didn't call it that, but it was effectively looking at that. And they looked at what were the qualities in the team leaders. And first thing to say is that most Google managers are pretty good. So, you know, Google doesn't have bad management, but they certainly were still identify between, you know, good and less good managers. The first and biggest attribute was they were a good coach. They had a very facilitative growth mindset when they were dealing with their reports. The second was that they empowered their team and did not micromanage them. The third was they created an inclusive team environment showing concern for both success and well-being. Their words, by the way. Was productive and results orientated, you know, yeah, that's important. Is a good communicator, listens, shares information, supports career development, discusses performance, a bit like the coaching one. Had a clear vision, strategy for the team, key technical skills to help advise the team, collaborated well across Google. That was that inter-team cooperation. Is a strong decision maker. Lots of evidence that actually procrastination by leaders is really bad for business and for people's experience too. And then you look at these 10 qualities, and what's really quite interesting is that 7 of them are what we call people skills, so often dismissed as soft skills. They're not soft at all. These are essential. These are leadership skills. These are the qualities in a leader that are going to bring out the best of people. There's nothing soft about them. I mean, the hard skill makes them stand out like those are more important, you know, and it's nonsense. These are the most important ones. And in fact, from a completely different field, you can see the same effect, right? Which is friend or foe signal. All of us have very, very deeply inbuilt with us a friend or foe signal, which is we meet someone new for the first time. Are they a friend? Are they a foe? We have to come to that decision very, very quickly. In our evolutionary past, that was a matter of life or death. And what are the factors that that get us to take it? It takes us less than 3 seconds. In fact, people would even suggest less than a second, but the 3-second study I'm citing was where they showed people a 3-second clip of a teacher interacting with pupils, and then they showed them a 1-minute clip. The judgment from the 3 seconds on whether the teacher was a good teacher was just as good as from the 1-minute one. So 3 seconds, we definitely got the information we need. Very quick anyway. There are 2 criteria when they unpack this in studies, 2 criteria that we're judging people on, 2 main, explains somewhere between 80 and 85% of the variance. I can't remember the precise figure, but it explains most of the variance of these 2 factors. Number 1, warmth. Do we warm to this person? Which basically is a shortcut to, does this person intend me good or harm? Second one is competence. Are they competent? And clearly the worst combination is that they're not warm, but they're highly competent. That's a real foe because that's a dangerous foe. And the best combination is that they are warm and competent. And if you look at these, effectively, this is warmth and competence in action. You know, so team leaders need to be warm and competent in that order of importance. So when we're promoting people, often it's all competence. It's all sort of technical skills. It's all, you know, that's what we look at. Warmth is far more important, possibly more difficult to measure, but more important. And so when we're thinking about that, we really, really need to think about people's skills. They're essential people skills. Now, Friday Pulse Week, you know, I'm just going to refer back to Friday Pulse, and then we'll have some time for questions. This is our core model of team happiness, drivers to happy teams, to outcomes. The 5 ways I'm going to come to in the 7 successes. So if you are in a team, it's very dynamic, by the way, it all feeds back on itself, but the 7 successes of happy teams are basically why you should want to lead a happy team, because a happy team is much nicer to lead. It's worth the investment of your time. So they're stable, they're energetic, they're collaborative, they're creative, They are more attractive. What do I mean? I don't mean they're better looking. I mean they attract talent to them. They attract projects towards them. They're more effective and productive, and they're ultimately more profitable. Everything goes better when a team is happy. The 5 ways to team happiness: connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. These are the big drivers of it. And they're basically, in psychology, they might be called relatedness. That's a DC and Ryan reference. Justice, or just fairness, autonomy, development, meaning. You can see Maslow in this. You can see Daniel Pink's drive, autonomy, mastery, purpose is his. Doesn't do relationship and justice. Just, fairness is really quite a lot about systemic things. Relationships, a lot about team. So these are really, really important. When we do a questionnaire, we ask 15 questions on it. I'll post you to this later, but if you want to know about how happy you are at work, you can go to friday1.com. You can follow that QR code and it will take you to that questionnaire. I will put this up again at the end. So the dynamic model, what are the biggest blocks to sort of operationalize this? And if we look at it, there's 2 things. One is a lack of training in people's skills, and the other is I haven't got the time. So do we train team leaders enough to be coaching mindset? Just take that one. I don't think so at all. They probably promoted with other skills, and then they just get to sink or swim in a leadership role. I haven't got the time pressure. And, the challenge with this is that time is the currency of relationships, that, spending time is our typical model, which is that time is money, but actually in relationships, it's about investing time. And relationships are really, really complex. This is from Robin Dunbar, his book called Friends, but basically he goes, our social world is by far the most complex thing in the universe. It's dynamic, in constant flux. Keeping track of it is very demanding in processing terms. Relationships are difficult. I mean, just to give you an example of that, I would hazard a guess that all of you on the call are your most difficult experiences, most challenging in life have been relational. So they're hard. In his book, Friends, Robin Dunbar talks about circles of friendships, that you have very close one, your intimates, you have your best friends, your good friends, and it categorizes them, and how we have different levels of friendships, and these are hard things. You can't have too many best friends because you haven't got the time for them. And he plots a graph, which is very interesting, which is how much time do we actually spend with people. And our best friends, we spend a lot more. This is saying we contact them every 3 days. It's a third of a contact per day. Whereas, our good friends outside, it might be only once every 2 weeks. And then our acquaintances once every couple of months. And then some people once a year, So the more time we spend with them, the closer they are. And with teams, it's going to be exactly the same. And we're all under time pressure. So this is just length of unpaid overtime for different professions. But, managers typically almost doing an extra hour a day, over an extra hour a day. Teachers, a lot of extra time, unpaid thing. There's a lot of unpaid overtime. But having said that, working hours aren't particularly increasing. But what is increasing is the intensity of work. So new technology has made us work available 24/7. There's a sort of speeding up of work, tighter deadlines. So these are trends from the European Skills Survey, and just basically showing that people's time use is changing and people are feeling more pressured. So leading a happy and successful team takes time. It takes time to build trust, and we need to see that as an investment rather than a spending of time. I'm going to skip these bits because we're running out of time. So how to build a happy and successful team with regular check-ins, and why it's an investment, a wise investment of time. The goal is to move up to great teams. The dynamic model is about, it shows that it's really important to do that and to drive that by creating good relationships, being fair, empowering people. And, one way you can do it is by taking 30 minutes a week. I talk about as measure, meet, repeat. Doesn't only have to be weekly. It can be monthly, quarterly. Quarterly will need to be longer, but they need to be longer, the less frequent time you spend on it. If you're going to have a quarterly thing, it's an away day. I think every team should be having a day away from every worker every quarter, looking at their goals and all sorts of things. But weekly, I think it's really important to check in with how people are. So first step is understand how teams are. The second is to get teams to discuss their results and identify actions, and then it's a continuous process. Measure, meet, repeat. on a weekly basis, this would be checking in how happy they were, what's gone well for them, what hasn't, meeting and discussing those, repeating that process. So you get a sort of cadence that you keep repeating. In a way, building a happy team is about creating good habits in your team. If you want to start with understanding it, then do the 5 ways questionnaire, meet as a team, review it, and then repeat that every quarter and maintain momentum either by doing weekly or monthly check-ins around things after that. At Friday Pulse, we've got a new offer, which is that you can do a one-off happiness check with your teams for free, right up to 500 people if you want to. It's going to be measuring the 5 ways with this questionnaire. And you can go to this link, Happy Friday Pulse free happiness check, follow that QR code if you want to take that offer. And basically, we're about to launch a new product which will sit in the middle of the 2 that we've had already, which we're calling Essential, which is a monthly tool. And so on the left, we have the understand what's going on in your company and your teams. That is basically a one-off survey like the 5 ways. Anyone can do that for free. The Essential will be starting with that, but then tracking every month 6 essential indicators that you can track, which are going to predict underperformance, flight, and burnout. And the Pro, which is any of you using it already, is the tool we have at the moment, which is the weekly, which is basically more about focus on how you build happy teams, but also got that understanding and tracking going on. And they're going to launch later this week or next week. So teams matter. Teams really matter for your happiness at work and in life. Great teams are happy and successful. Team leadership really matters. And I talked a bit about how to build a great team experience. Ways of finding out more is that you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can check your own happiness at work with that QR code. We can get going using Friday Pulse and measure the happiness of your whole team by using the free happiness check.